Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 17 on the American West. And this one, ladies and gentlemen, it's about the impact of the recent changes and developments that we looked at in the previous videos, the impact that had on the Native American tribes who were living on the plains. Now, if you've forgotten what their traditional way of life was all about, have a look back at video number 3. But, as I'm going to try and suggest in this video, their traditional way of life was about to be impacted and altered forever. Now, the video's in two halves, ladies and gentlemen. The first half we'll look at 3 important developments: the railroad, the cattle and the gold. And then the second half we'll look at a new idea, the idea of Indian reservations. So that's what we're going to be doing. Now, first of all, the railroad. The runaway train came down the track and she blew. Woohoo! There we have it, ladies and gentlemen, the train. Now, let's sum that up in a little poem. The biggest upheaval for tribes on the plains was the spread and arrival of railroad and trains. They brought thousands of people, the young and the old, to farm the wide spaces and dig for the gold. There we have the 3 big impacts: the train, the cattle and farming, and the gold. They were to have a huge impact on the Plains Indians. Well, let's have a look at trains first. Why did they have such a big impact? Simple. They brought people and they altered the plains, particularly to do with the buffalo. 1851, the Fort Laramie Treaty, ladies and gentlemen, allowed the railway surveyors, the railway constructors onto the Indian land to plan the Trans-American Railroad. This caused huge disruption, particularly for the video. For the buffalo, sorry. I strongly suggest you go and have a look at video number 3 to show, just to remind yourself, how reliant the Native American tribes on the plains were on a regular supply of buffalo. The trains brought noise to scare the buffalo. They brought fences to protect the workers, to protect the track, and they brought the eventual destruction of the buffalo herd. This was to be a disaster for the tribes on the plains. The railroad companies also encouraged buffalo hunting. Why would they do that? 2 reasons. 1, food for the workers who were laying the tracks. Secondly, they would then transport the buffalo hunters. Very famous people like Buffalo Bill, William Cody. The trains would bring the buffalo hunters and they would make profit, of course. So, also, later on, they actually were part of the policy which, if they thought, right, we get rid of the buffaloes by bringing all the hunters in, then the Indians will be so hungry they'll have to go and live on these reservations, which is what many people wanted them to do. Some Indian tribes, for example the Pawnee, they did move to the reservations. Others were not so sure. Railroad companies were given 40 million acres of land by the government, which they could then sell to the settlers. This was to cause problems, which would, in the end, ladies and gentlemen, lead to conflict. So the train was very, very important for bringing change to the traditional way of life of the Plains Indians. The second one, our old friend, the longhorn cattle. The cattle. We've looked at some of that in previous videos. Simple. Cattle eat grass. So do buffalo. Now, at first, there's millions of buffalo, the herds all over the plains. In 1860, there are 130,000 cattle in the west. By 1880, ladies and gentlemen, there are 4.5 million cattle. Can you see that there is a conflict of interests? The buffalo, the cattle, both eat the same grass. Can they both survive? Well, not if the trains are bringing in hunters. We've looked at the long drive, the trails like the Chisholm Trail. It went through Indian territory. Now, they were supposed to pay the Indians for this, but of course, sometimes they wouldn't, which again would lead to conflict. That's a key word. I'll keep mentioning it in this video. Conflict, trouble was brewing. The cattle ranchers built on the Indian land. The long drives upset the buffalo herd. If you remember video 15, Oliver Loving, one of the main cattle drivers, he actually was killed in 1867 fighting against the Comanche tribe. This shows the conflict that I'm hinting at in this video. And the conflict was caused by the changes and the impact on the Indian traditional way of life. Some tribes dealt with it okay. Some Indians dealt with it okay. Some even went to work for the cattle bosses on the cattle drives. But on the whole, the cattlemen and the Indians, it could lead to conflict. You better fight for the right to party, sang the Beastie Boys. But the Indians weren't fighting for the right to party. They were going to have to fight for the right to survive. Big difference. So, we've looked at trains, we've looked at cattle. The third major impact, the third development, ladies and gentlemen, gold. Always believe in your soul. That's so sang Spandau Ballet. Gold. Very disruptive. Reasons why? Well, let's have a listen. The first gold rush, 1848, 1849. The San Francisco 49ers, those of you who like American football. Now, that gold rush saw miners, prospectors, thousands of people rush across the Great Plains heading to California where the gold had been discovered. Now, that was bad for the Indian tribes in California, but not too bad for the tribes on the plains, because all they did was cross over the land. They didn't settle on it. But more gold was discovered, ladies and gentlemen. 1859, gold is discovered in the Rocky Mountains up near Idaho. Again, miners moved in, but in their rush to get in and get the gold, they often ignored the promises or the treaties that had been made and signed with the Indians, or maybe they were just unaware of the treaties. They were desperate to get at the gold. This might lead to bad feeling and conflict, ladies and gentlemen. Again, another treaty was set up to deal with this, the Fort Wise Treaty, later renamed the Fort Lyon Treaty. This was 1861 to try and deal with this new development. A year later, gold's found again, this time in Montana. Again, the gold rush. People move in. It's like a magnet. They're attracted to the gold. They want to get there first so that they can get rich. Many people rush to Montana. It's all about speed. So the quickest route is the one that they will take. Unfortunately, though, the quickest route was through the Lakota Sioux hunting grounds, which was land that had been promised to be protected by the Fort Laramie Treaty. Well, would these people rushing in, would they listen to the Fort Laramie Treaty? Would they take care of it? No, they just rushed across the Sioux hunting grounds, known as the Bozeman Trail. Well, how would the Indians feel about that, ladies and gentlemen? Yet again, a promise has been broken. what would they do? Maybe fighting and conflict would be the answer. Next video. So, we've seen gold, cattle, trains, all had an impact on the life, the traditional way of life of the Native American tribes on the plains. Video 3, remember. So, the second half of the video, we're going to look at something called the reservations. Now, what's this all about? Areas of land set aside for these Native American tribes. Say, look, you go and live there, you'll be fine. We give you that land, you can stay there. But remember, many of the Plains Indians tribes were nomads. They liked to move and wander around following the buffalo. Now, on the reservations, they're supposed to stay in one place. That's not their way of life. That's not their culture. Might lead to conflict. Why did the government want to move the tribes onto the reservations? Well, of course, to free up the land. More and more people are moving onto the land. Cattlemen, homesteaders, railroads, gold miners. That's what the government wanted. One answer then, move the Indians away, and that frees up the land. So the government made promises to the tribes, to the Plains Indians, yet more promises. Number one, if you move, we promise you won't lose any more land. Number two, if you move, we promise we will protect you. Number three, if you move, we promise we will supply things for you, clothes, equipment, animals, etc. So you will have an easier way of life. But of course it wasn't their traditional way of life. So there's a mismatch. Get the word out. There's a mismatch between the two. Some tribes did okay. The Navajo, they went onto the reservations, they organised it well, and they were treated well, and they thrived. Other tribes struggled. Other tribes hated it so much that groups of warriors left and went back to their original land. So this is what the government wants. Why would the Indians agree to this? What's the reasons? Why are they willing to give up their land? Well, they weren't willing. Number one, some of them believed the promises that I've just outlined. Number two, some of them felt they had little alternative. They were desperate. Many of them were hungry. Remember the scarcity of the buffalo. Number three, they thought, well, if we go with the US government, they might make us stronger. That gives us strength against our old other enemy tribes who we've not got on well with for many years. And the fourth reason, basically, the army forced them. There was little option. They had to take this alternative. So some of the Indians from the plains do begin to be resettled onto the reservations. Well, what impact did that have? Simply, one sentence. It contributed to the decline of the traditional Indian way of life. They were nomads, they were hunters, but now they were in one place and they were farmers. Not enough buffalo, not enough land, no more freedom to roam. They had to farm and rely on food supplied by the government. But these promises weren't always kept, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe you're seeing a pattern here in how the Indian tribes were handled and dealt with. The government had set up a Bureau of Indian Affairs to deal with the Indians on the reservations. But the people in charge, the agents or the officials, they were often terrible people, corrupt, cheating. They sort of made money themselves and didn't supply what they were supposed to for the Indian tribes. This was bad for the tribes. Also, some of the white settlers were greedy. They would argue that they believed in manifest destiny. It's our right to take everything, God-given right. So when they've moved onto the land and the Indians are on the reservations, some of the settlers are saying, look, we want more land. Give us more. Well, the only way that they could have more is if the government reduced the size of the reservation. So again, policy, possible promises being broken. So, President Grant, 1868, he's the President of America. He realizes what's happening on these reservations and he tries to do something about it. He introduces what he calls his peace policy, 1868. It's an attempt to stop conflicts and try to reduce tension. What did he do? How did he do that? 3 things. 1, get rid of these corrupt agents. Replace them with the Quakers, fair, honest, decent, respectable people who had the trust of more of the tribes of the Indians. So that was a good move. Secondly, he appointed a commissioner of Indian affairs, a man called Eli Parker, who was an Indian. So maybe that might help by giving them a bit of a better say. He's now in charge of the Indian affairs. And the third one, our old friend, money, money, money. Must be funny in a rich man's world. 2 million of these bad boys. $2 million US. Grant said, right, let's spend some money to try and improve the quality of life for the Indians on the reservations. So Grant, fair play to him, he's trying to help. But throughout this video, I've hinted all the time, I've mentioned the word conflict. Was conflict coming? Indeed it was. The railway, the cattle, the homesteaders, the gold, all of them, all of those things, those changes, those developments meant that life was changing for the Plains Indians. Some accepted it and went to the reservation. Others did not, and they fought back the conflict. That's coming in the next video. As ever, I hope it's been useful. All the best now. See you soon. Bye now.